This is a Q Media production.
Leading and navigating change across a business can be overwhelming. So many leaders are handed a project by their board or CEO, and suddenly they're expected to create the vision, inspire their team, navigate roadblocks, and make some really hard decisions. It can feel like you're swimming in the ocean at night, not knowing which way to go. So how is a leader supposed to know how to drive change? The challenge is, there's no course or dummy's guide to leading change. Until now. This is your crash course in leading change, and I'm your guide, Lauren Ryder. In this podcast, you'll learn from top C-suite and executive leaders who've driven impactful change across their organizations. No matter what project you're leading, maybe it's a sales transformation or a restructure or a digital transformation, either way, the approach to leading change is the same. It all starts with an inspirational leader, and that's you. Today on the podcast, we have Simon Pollard. He started his career as a lawyer, has held roles in top-tier companies like Macquarie Bank, HSBC, and KPMG. He's been VP at HCL and IBM, and has worked to commercialize and scale some really well-known startups. Now, he uses his years of experience to mentor CEOs. Today, we talk about the large-scale projects that Simon has run. We discuss how business and technology meet, the importance of hiring the right teams and people, how to manage a mass retrenchment, and the importance of driving values at every step. Enjoy the podcast. Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here.
So you have had an extraordinary career, and you've worked your whole career in the tech industry without being technical. So
thanks for that. Yes.
So you started off as a lawyer, you worked in investment banking, you scaled startups, and you have run some transformations for some incredibly large organizations. If you could weave a theme through your very diverse career, what would that be?
Oh, it's the business side of technology. You don't need to be a computer scientist to live in that world.
So tell me a bit more, how did that all come about?
I blame my father for the whole career, really. He worked for IBM for 37 years. And I grew up marinating in the business side of technology around the dinner table. So I was fascinated by the industry. But I didn't want to be compared to him, so I went a different path. I went into law. And I became a specialist lawyer in commercial contracting around technology, acting for vendors like Microsoft and Anderson Consulting, as it then was, Accenture now, and PeopleSoft. I actually incorporated PeopleSoft in Australia and around Asia. They ended up getting bought by Oracle, and also acting for some of the biggest buyers like Commonwealth Bank, Macquarie Bank, so big users of technology. So on both sides of the transactions.
So tell me, when you talk about business and technology, how do you see that? How do you describe why that's so important?
Well, take a bank. A bank is really just a technology business masquerading as a lender. You know, they're completely dependent nowadays on technology of various kinds. From the front of the house, where we're all used to interacting nowadays through apps on our phone, to the back with the core banking system. All of the business processes and the data layer and everything else that goes in between. They need a huge staff internally to manage that, even if they decide to outsource some or all of the part of IT to a vendor like an IBM.
So I know you've done some incredible projects, run some major transformations. I just want to jump right into it because these sound like incredible projects, and I know our listeners would be really interested. So let's talk about the first big program that you got your teeth into.
Well, the first really gigantic one was when I ended up working for IBM after being reluctant to work there and being compared to my legendary father, whose photo is on the wall in corporate headquarters in New York. So I ended up working for IBM for quite a few years overseas in New York and elsewhere. And, you know, one of the roles they gave me was to run one of the outsourcing business units for IBM. And so my task was to take a business unit that was already successful. In fact, it had $5 billion of revenue and about 80,000 people in the business unit. And my task was to take that part of it, which was focused on banks and insurance companies globally, which was about 28,000 people out of the 80,000 and roughly 400 million in revenue, and which was lagging relative to the 5 billion total, right? So they wanted to up the percentage. So my job was to turbocharge that. And so what I did is I went in and I said, look, we've got a whole bunch of business processes that we handle for banks already, but they're managed by humans in delivery centers in India and in Krakow and in, Guadalajara. And they're not standardized and they're not software enabled. So IBM, as you probably know, is a massive software company as well in its own right. So we went searching through the IBM asset base, looking for tools that would automate business processes in banking.
Excellent. So when you were given this project, how did you take it on? I mean, most people, when given that, would run 1,000,000 miles an hour, right?
I did. I ran out to the car park. I drove home and I had a minor freak out when they told me how many people were reporting to me and the size and scale of it. I actually did have a minor freak out.
Wow.
But no, I learned a valuable lesson, which is that with that project, I think with any of these large projects, if you're going to change things, you've got to first declare what the vision is.
Yeah.
And the vision has to be so simple and so clear and compelling that everybody in the organization will rally around it. And so the central problem for IBM in that business unit was you can't just keep growing a business by taking on customers' people. Pretty soon you'll go from 80,000 employees in the unit to where are you going to get 500,000? It's going to get ludicrous. So I said, look, we have to software automate every sub-process in banking.
How did you go about that? Where did you start?
I hired smart people who were better looking and wiser than me, and said, map out the processes, and then let's go searching for tools that we already own somewhere in IBM, somewhere in the world, that we can use to automate these sub-processes. And if we don't have a tool, we'll go out and buy a tool.
Right. So when you were running this, who were your stakeholders in this project?
Well, mainly it was the guy that I reported to, who was a total legend in IBM called Mike Daniels, who was one of the senior vice presidents who reported to the CEO. And so he was under the gun to turbocharge this unit.
So you were really given authority to just go and do exactly what you need. Did you think that was a real sort of piece of your success in that?
Oh, yeah. Sponsorship from the top is everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I think anybody that's been through a major transformation project knows that if you have inadequate or weak or vacillating leadership sponsorship, it's nobody in the organization is going to pay any attention.
Yeah.
Because the forces that oppose change in an organization are always stronger than the forces for change, unless there's sponsorship.
So that's right. So when you found opposition to the changes, how did you address that?
I told them to call my boss.
That's one way of doing it.
If you don't want to do this, don't talk to me, talk to him.
Right.
And he was sponsored in turn by the CEO. We had to go to the strategy team in IBM, which comprised all of the senior vice presidents that ran the businesses and the CEO and the CFO. And we had to present the case and say, this is what I want to do. Mike's endorsed it. It's going to cost this. I think we can get 3 or 4x out of it. In the end, we got 5x out of it in 4 years.
That's fantastic. Did you come across any major roadblocks? Obviously, the people ones, you escalated one place. Were there any other challenges with the actual project?
The biggest roadblock was not the customers. The customers loved it. That's how we got 5x. The problem was that there's a saying that I don't think is unique to IBM, but it's certainly prevalent in IBM, which is save your best selling for inside the company. You have to really persuade a lot of stakeholders to line up around your vision. So what I did is I formed a cross-IBM council, which I called the Financial Services Council, and representatives from the hardware business that make mainframe computers, right, and servers, the software business, which is really the profit driver nowadays in IBM, and the consulting business and the outsourcing business. And I called on them monthly to meet and align their brands, their organizations around this process automation vision. And they were very, very helpful in doing that, because once you get those stakeholders buying into it, everybody under them falls into line.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like a really good tip for people. Leading transformational change can be challenging without a community of like-minded professionals where you can learn and practice the real skills of transformation. I am excited to share that Jez Tile has just launched an incredible online global community of transformation professionals. And let me tell you, it is a game changer. It's called People of Transformation, and it's a deep dive beyond the theories, beyond the frameworks, and straight into actionable excellence. It will allow you to shift from problem seeking to opportunity creation and eventually future shaping. So if you're ready to lead the charge, head to peopleoftransformation.com and use the code LEADINGCHANGE at checkout for your special offer. Founding member spots are limited, so don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. So the next project that you came into, I mean, they just kind of keep getting bigger. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Oh, at HSBC?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is fun because, yeah, after I left IBM, I was casting around for what to do next, and a former IBM client of mine in London who works at HSBC Bank rang me up and said, "Do you want to come to London and help me with a change project?" And I said, "Well, if you're buying the drinks, Gary, I'll go anywhere you want." So I spent the next 20 months working 7 days a week alongside this guy who was Chief Transformation Officer of HSBC globally. And our task was to essentially upend the world's biggest captive service provider, 110,000 people.
That number, for most people who'd be listening, would just be mind-boggling, 110,000 people.
Yeah, it was pretty mind-boggling for me. I knew HSBC, and I knew that the captive delivery organization was big, but I had no idea really how big. It was 70,000 people just in IT and 40,000 people in operations.
So we'll start from the beginning of this one. What was the driver for this project? Why did you get called on?
The government helped us in the UK. They passed, they were very worried about contamination of risk from the investment banking side of the house to the retail banking side of the house, and putting the balance sheet of the retail depositors at risk. So they passed some laws which came to be known colloquially as ring fencing laws, which said that you cannot muddy the balance sheet of the two parts of the bank. And they went even further than that. They said, if there is a service provider, whether it's an external service provider or an internal captive service provider, that service provider cannot provide services to both organizations because of the obvious risk of process contamination in the back office. So that was the impetus. And then we decided that that was a golden opportunity to modernize.
Yeah, because I think when you hear about a project that is all about, separation or compliance, most people go, "Oh God, do we have to do this?" But it sounds like you were able to layer on something that was really beneficial.
We had to layer on this whole, because I mentioned earlier, nothing really happens unless there's a clear and compelling vision. If we'd gone around to the stakeholders in the bank and said, "Guess what? We're going to comply with ring fencing legislation," there would have been a collective yawn, and everyone would have said, "Look, come back to me in a year. Otherwise, don't bother me. I've got a job to do." So we layered on top this vision of modernizing the service provision, and that's what we did.
So what did the program look like? What were the sort of things you had to deliver?
Well, the simplest example was the first thing we did is we went to all of the stakeholders who ran the actual business units in the bank, like business banking, commercial lending, retail banking, and so on. And we said, what is your biggest problem with back office service delivery? And we got some fairly consistent answers, which is it's a black box. We don't know what's going on in there. All I know is that I get an ever larger invoice every month, and I don't understand what's even on the invoice. I can't understand it. It's in IT terms. For example, one guy said to us, "Look, I don't know what a MIP is." A MIP, for those listening that don't know, is an acronym, stands for millions of instructions per second, and it's the way that you measure the power of a mainframe computer and the consumption rate of a mainframe computer. So the service delivery organization was sending out invoices saying, you've consumed this many MIPS in the past 3 months, therefore your bill is $40 million. And everyone said, what the heck is a MIP? So they just were totally divorced from any understanding of what was going on in this opaque organization. So we decided that modernizing would be a compelling vision that everyone would buy into if we could transform service delivery into a language that the business could consume and understand. And the best way to do that was to do activity-based costing analysis of every process in the captive and attribute that cost to a banking product. So, for example, if you're running retail banking and one of your products is a credit card, you want to know, it's quite useful to know not only what is it costing in IT terms, what is it costing in labor terms to stand up a credit card account for you or for me, to administer that account, and to close it at the end of the life cycle. What is the end-to-end cost of doing those sub-processes in that chain? If you can give them what we called a service catalog that we wrote in banking product terms, and then we had all of the costs attributed. And we used a product, I assume I'm allowed to say a vendor's name. We used a product called ServiceNow, which was the leading tool then, probably still is one of the leading tools for this type of work. I wrote a new service catalog for the bank, and we got Deloitte to put an army of people in doing the activity-based costing analysis. And then we launched it in retail banking and then in business banking, and everybody said, wow, now we understand our invoice.
That's amazing. It sounds like you might have had some additional people changes through this project. Did you have any organizational structure changes, roles, responsibilities? Because often when you change the underlying processes, you also have to change what the people do around it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, it wasn't part of the plan, but we did shrink the organization substantially because you just don't need 110,000 people in a captive, even in a bank as large as HSBC. So to give a rough metric, a bank of their size usually depends on software applications to run things, and the number of applications you can broadly gauge by the size of the balance sheet of the bank is a rough metric. They should have had maybe, depending on what you class as an application, they should have had maybe 2,000 applications. Well, they had 18,000 applications.
Wow.
So nobody wanted to ever turn anything off. There was no, what in IT we call demising or sunsetting strategy. They just initiated, implemented, and then just kept running stuff forever and a day. So a lot of those 70,000 people were building code or maintaining code in applications that were really old and didn't need to be in the bank, or they were one country or one product specific.
So shrinking teams and restructuring teams, I would say, is probably one of the biggest challenges for a leader to come into if they've never actually done that before. It's really scary to tell somebody, hey, guess what? You won't have a job tomorrow. How do you approach a project like that?
Well, again, you hire great people who've done it before, and you instruct them what the vision is, what the end game is. You sell upwards so that the CEO and the CIO know what you're doing. The business unit heads, who are the real customers, the internal customers, know what you're doing. And then there's very little resistance. As long as you manage the process well, and you have a great team around you. Of course, it's on a human level, it's not fun.
Yeah.
It's not fun, but it had to be done.
Yeah. So I suppose, often we also forget about the people who got left behind, right? So how did they actually manage that? How did you manage communications? I mean, we're talking a lot of people.
Yeah.
What was your approach to communications with all of the teams?
Well, I mean, anytime you're having large-scale retrenchment, and we're talking large-scale, thousands and thousands of people, the first thing you want to do is figure out who's essential and who's not essential. And then you want to figure out who would be inclined to voluntarily retrench themselves, who says, look, I'm young enough in my career, I can get a job anywhere I want, no problem, I'll take a payout, and they're quite happy. There's always a category of people, a cohort of people who are not happy and don't want to be let go for reasons to do with where they are at in their career or maybe their family life. They don't want to move countries. They don't want to move towns. It's a hassle for them. So they're the ones that you focus on. It's a prioritization grid. Yeah.
So if you look at that project and take a step back, what went wrong? What would you have done differently?
Oh my God, so many things went wrong. I mean, it sounds really smooth. I talk about it now. Well, first of all, we had one of the business unit leaders who ran arguably the most important business in HSBC, which is commercial lending. Most people don't know this, but HSBC is the biggest commercial lender in the world by a long stretch. So it's 20% of the profits come from this one guy who runs this, and he did not want to buy in. He just didn't want to buy in, and he had his own reasons for that, and that he wasn't just an ideologue. He had some well thought out reasons. So we had a standoff between him and the CEO. I kept out of it.
Yeah, sensible.
I kept out of it. My job was really to summarize where we were at, what progress we could make if he did not come to the party, what that would mean for the captive organisation. Could we even comply with the legislation if he didn't buy in? And in the end, he was told by the board, sorry, we understand your point of view, but this is happening.
Right, excellent.
But that took 3-4 months of standoff.
Yeah, it takes a long time to do that. Would you have approached that differently?
I would have gone to him earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think late stakeholder engagement is usually the bane.
That's a killer. It's an absolute killer.
Yeah.
And I would have gone to him a lot earlier. I would have spent more time with him. As it was, we had a program that we laid out and said, we're going to come and see you monthly and give you progress updates of initially the strategy and vision and then progress updates. He thought that was inadequate.
Yeah.
He was right.
Yeah.
He was right on that front. We needed to engage with him weekly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as businesses grow, enterprise change teams are expected to deliver more. But it can be challenging to keep all your company's change planning aligned. Documents get lost or out of date, and executives can't get a clear report on your enterprise change activities. Until now. Change Plan is the incredible connected platform that gives you a powerful, easy-to-use workspace. You'll get all your reporting at a click, an automated front door process, an org chart synced in with your HR system, and the best part, there's portfolio dashboards for leaders. It is the most comprehensive and user-friendly change tool I have seen on the market, and the results speak for themselves. Teams who use Change Plan experience a 30% bump in productivity and up to 50% reduction in change saturation. If you want to see Change Plan in action, head over to changeplan.co/leadingchange to set up an obligation-free demo for your team. Let's move on to some other types of projects you've done, because those were big and those were meaty. But you've also worked on small businesses that have scaled up to become large. Do you want to tell us about how you got into that and sort of some of the projects or companies you've worked with there?
Well, my first exposure to that type of world was when I went to work at Macquarie Bank in the tech venture capital team, which still exists. It's still the same guys in that team doing it, and much, much bigger balance sheet now than we had then. And our job was to identify themes in the economy that Macquarie could add what they like to call an unfair advantage to, whether that's the brand, whether that's relationships. It's certainly not money. The money's a commodity. So one of the things we did is we saw the move to online early, and so we invested in a little company called Seek.com, which was walking around the market saying, we're going to move all of the jobs classified ads out of newspapers and onto the internet. And everyone went, are you kidding? And now, of course, they're probably the biggest job market in Australia and probably in 2 or 3 other countries, US, China, South America.
So what did you do for that project?
Well, we assembled a talent team around them. So the 2 brothers who founded it basically, they had an idea, but they didn't really know how to operationalize it. So Macquarie and a couple of the other investors were instrumental in putting the leadership team together. So people who could actually build the technology, for example, and get this whole thing operationalized. And then we stayed with them through all of their fundraising rounds. That was the main thing, providing continuity and support. And we had a couple of representatives on the board. We persuaded James Packer to come on board as an investor. So that really made their business fly.
How important is that to have really kind of deep-pocketed investors or influential stakeholders in that regard?
For a startup, there's a famous book called Crossing the Chasm, which describes the dilemma that all startups face. Even if you've got an idea that is timely and has a market, a big global market, actually penetrating that market and scaling up is incredibly challenging. So the book describes how you do that. And, one of the ways that you do it is you need a lot of momentum behind you in terms of smart money. People talk a lot about smart money and dumb money. It's really true. We had an investment in a company called RP Data, which was a property data business based out of Queensland. And that business really didn't have any of the processes that it needed to scale up. And so we hired a CEO called Graham Marabito, and we put him in as CEO. We persuaded the founder CEO to step back onto the board, and we put Graham in.
How hard was that?
Oh, it was very hard because of his ego.
Yeah.
He was a little bit of a quirky business genius, and he'd done a great job setting the business up, but he was not really a corporate animal and didn't know business process. He didn't know unit economics. He didn't understand his own business, actually, to be honest with you. And so Graham came in, and the founder watched as Graham took it to 3, 4, 5x, and then I think we listed it for $450 million. After we bought it for $50 million.
So you've mentioned that one of the big challenges with helping a startup to grow is getting the CEO or founder potentially out of the way if they don't have the right skills to take it to the next level.
Yeah.
Are there any other big roadblocks that you find commonly while trying to transform and grow these businesses?
It's all about talent. I mean, you're not only around me and those other projects I described, but in any business, certainly a startup, you need to have the right people on the bus. The CEO and the board are there to say what direction the bus is going, what's the strategy, what's the compelling vision. But then you need to really think hard about what mix of skills do we need given the pre-existing skills, say, of the founder or founders. Because when you're investing in startups, you soon find out that there's a saying, you get the CEO that you get. Sometimes they're in the technology business, for example, they're a technologist, but they don't have business skills. And sometimes it's the other way around. They're very good business people. They don't understand the technology. So you have to supplement their weaknesses and build a team around them that compensates for that.
So I've always believed that when you have a startup, even at the first 1, 2, 3 years, you can have a very different team than years 4 onwards as you've actually gotten out of that growth curve.
Yeah, that's sometimes true. Some people can make that jump. There are some well-known inflection points, like 150 staff is typically renowned as an inflection point where complexity of processes, like I hate to say HR processes, finance processes, approval processes, and so on, even board and governance processes have to become much, much more sophisticated just to manage the thing. Otherwise, it runs off the rails. Some people can make that leap and some people can't. And part of the job of the board and the investors is to figure out who on the team can go on the journey and who can't.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not easy. Sometimes you don't know until you're on the journey.
So if you look at the difference between, running large-scale transformations for big businesses and then scaling up small businesses, transforming them into market leaders, what's the difference? What's the similarities?
Well, there's actually very little difference. I mean, it really comes down to vision. Somebody in the room has to articulate a compelling, clear vision. If you don't have that, and if the CEO doesn't have that, the founder doesn't have that, you're in real trouble in a startup. In a large project, if the stakeholder who's running it or the CEO who's sponsoring it can't articulate that, you're in real trouble. You need to have a compelling vision around which people are prepared to congregate and which they can get excited about, and that has a direct correlation with the work they're doing day to day, so they know what their contribution is. If you don't have that, why are we all coming to work?
Do you have any tips to do storytelling around that vision? That's something that's worked for you?
Yes. Communication about vision needs to be, or at least I'm being a little bit cynical here, at least seen to be two-way. It's a very good thing to poll the affected people and ask them, where do you think the business needs to go? Where do you think this project needs to go? Where do you think this change program needs to go? What are the biggest problems that you see from your perspective within the organization? In a large organization, that's even more important because there's often hidden, there are people who aggregate knowledge around the shop who are in the most unexpected places. And if you can find them and surface their institutional knowledge, which might come from their smarts or it might come from their longevity in the organization, they are gold. They are absolute gold because they can help you forge the program and the vision around the program.
Yeah, so I use those guys as your champions and help them to drive. Yeah, absolutely. Now, as you've moved on to your career, you have spent a lot of time mentoring people. Tell us about what you're doing now and how that relates to what you've done before.
Well, mentoring's a soft skill. It's a sort of a high EQ skill. That's what people like to talk about. Of course, when I was a partner in a law firm, you're automatically meant to be doing that with the team that works for you. When I joined IBM, I found out typical IBM, they had a highly over-engineered formal mentoring program, and anybody who was in the executive ranks was expected to mentor. And that structured program included signing an actual contract with a mentee which laid out how many hours a month you were going to commit to them and their career, how accessible you would be, and what exactly the goals were for the program. That was a word of mouth thing. So I ended up at one point I must have been okay at it because at one point I ended up having my calendar crowded with 21 mentees from all over the IBM world.
So it's like adopting a whole village.
It was a bit like adopting a whole village. And no, I'm quite proud because some of those guys are now running IBM. They're doing great things inside the company, and indeed in other companies.
And what tips do you have for being a mentor?
Oh gosh, some of it is pattern recognition. It's not that hard. If you've had the sort of career that I've had, which has been a bit diverse, you have the ability to see perspectives on things that are a bit orthogonal to the way other people see it. I was a lateral hire into IBM, and my boss, Mike Daniels, said to me once, you're the most impactful lateral hire I've ever seen come into IBM. He said, why is that? And I said, well, I think it's because I came up as a lawyer, and when you come into the culture of a law firm, especially when you're admitted to the partnership, because everybody in the building has a law degree, you're all members of the same profession. The only thing that separates people is years of experience. So you really are very collegiate. It's not like a regular corporation where there's diverse skill sets and diverse backgrounds and diverse roles. Everyone's basically, regardless of their legal specialization, everyone's a lawyer, everyone's a member of the profession. So you have this automatic collegiality. I just carried that over into the corporate world when I left the legal practice in 2000. So, I behaved less in a command and control way that a lot of executives, especially in US businesses, tend to do, and much more with a sort of an EQ attitude. So it was about listening, it was about pattern recognition, seeing things, persuading people that the skills that they had, that they were worried were too narrow, were actually highly portable. Yeah, I had a guy that I mentored in China who was in the finance function in IBM China, and he thought his whole career was going to be as a financial controller. And the most he could aspire to was moving up in the finance function. Seems like a narrow view of the world because everybody needs people with facility with numbers and putting together business cases. So now he's the chief strategy officer at an airline.
Wow. Well, that's a giant leap.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And if somebody is a mentee or wants to find a mentor, what would you say to get the best out of that relationship? What should they do?
Well, I would say pester people. Yeah, don't be backward. We all need mentors. We all need sponsors in our career. Sometimes it takes a little bit of pushing because people generally are happy to help. People generally, if asked, they're happy to help. But it's carving out the time in busy executive calendars to get that help and get it effective. So I would say don't be embarrassed to just pester people for time.
So to wrap up, would you be all right if any of our listeners picked up and pestered you for some
business advice?
No,
I don't want to hear from anybody. No, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, I do enjoy it. I've been doing that side of thing, and that's kind of what I want to do going forward is coaching and mentoring. Yeah.
So where can they find you?
They can find me at my email address, simon@miranui.com. They can call my mobile. It's on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very good. This has been an incredible discussion. I have learned so much. So thank you, Simon.
You're very welcome. It's
really
nice to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks.